Hey everybody, welcome to today's webinar. I'm just pausing for a quick second here so that we can give everybody a chance to log in as always. Quick note to any of you guys, if you have any friends that are trying to get in, we actually sold out through our registration platform, but we usually do have no-shows for these free webinars. So if you guys have any friends calling or texting you saying they can't get in, have them call the store and one of my colleagues can help them get a link. We should have space. It's just we can only register so many people. So just that's a little quick side note there. But Louis, congrats on selling out. This is one of our most popular topics. Okay, so quick note for anybody who has not attended these webinars before. First of all, welcome. We're glad to have you. This is a webinar format rather than a Zoom meeting. So when you want to ask questions during this class, you're going to open your Zoom menu and type your question into the Q&A box, and I will be monitoring the questions there. Louis, are you planning to go for the full hour and then take questions this round?
Yeah, I'll probably go for the full hour, and I'll probably get a little bit after as well.
Okay, so Louis' classes usually they go for the full hour. So for anybody who needs to leave before the Q&A starts, we will be hosting. We won't be hosting. We'll be putting the recording on our YouTube channel with all of the Q&A tomorrow, and you're always welcome to follow up by calling us or by sending us an email, sending me an email after the class, and I'll get your information to Louis if you have any questions and cannot stay. If you have any issues during the class, please feel free to send me a chat or something in the question box. I'll be monitoring that. And I think that about covers it. Quick note for anybody who's just joining now, we are recording this class. So again, the recording will be available tomorrow on our YouTube channel if you have to leave before the class concludes. All right. Quick introduction. Louis done a lot of classes with us, but I know we have new people joining all the time. Louis Ratchford's joining us today to talk about shade gardens, which is one of our most popular topics. Louis, I know this is a passion of yours. Louis works primarily at our Fair Oaks store and our trees and shrubs department. He also does a lot of design. And in the winter, especially, he can be found in the greenhouse and working on our Christmas florals and that type of stuff. So multi-talented. Louis, thank you for joining us, and I'll let you go ahead and get started.
Okay, hello, my name is Louis, and I'm here to start the seminar on shade gardens. So let's go ahead and get started here. Okay, so shade gardens. So what we're going to talk about today, first of all, in the preview, we're going to talk about sun requirements, advantages of a shade garden, the details of a shade garden, the basic design. We're going to talk briefly about native shade gardens, and then we're going to go in and talk specifically about different plants that love the shade. So that's like a little preview of what we're going to be getting into today. So when you think about a shade garden, it's all about the sun. A shade garden requires either morning sun, and that sun that usually comes up, in the east, and then probably you can get direct sun until around 11, 12 o'clock in the afternoon. After that, then it goes into, the afternoon. And that's when you get into the really, really hot sun. And a lot of plants that require shade can't take that hot afternoon sun. So they'll probably get crispied and they just won't do well. Another type of shade is dappled shade, which is what the photograph is all about. This is the type of shade that you usually find in a forest where the sun actually peers through, but it's constantly changing. So the plants never sit in the sun for a very long time at all. And then the other type is actually no sun whatsoever. Usually find these, when you have a house like on the north face or something like that. So those are the requirements for the shade garden. So what are some of the advantages of having a shade garden? Probably the first and best one I can think of when I was writing this is that it's in the shade. Today it's supposed to get up to 103 degrees. During the summertime, it is always really, really hot out. And I don't know if you have any sunny gardens, but going out there and weeding, going out there and looking at the bees, going out there and trimming back some of your perennials, or doing anything in the hot sun is not a lot of fun. When you have a shade garden, basically most parts of the day, it's in the shade, so it's not going to be so hot. I actually do a lot of hiking in the woods in the shade when it's really hot out, and I can tell you that there's a big difference between being in the shade and being in the sun. One of the other advantages of a shade garden is that it's very low maintenance. There's not a lot of weeding involved. Plants tend to grow a lot slower in shade. So there's probably, the maintenance aspect of it is not as much. The other thing is watering. When you water plants in shade, they're less stressed. You take a plant, especially right now, when you plant it in the sun, if you forget to water it at any point after you plant it, it can be devastating for that plant, and it will get crispy within a day or two. In a shade garden, you have a lot more wiggle room when it comes to watering. If you forget to water, it's probably not going to be as big of a deal because it's not baking in that very hot afternoon sun. And one of the things that I love about shade gardens is they tend to be a lot more relaxing, a lot more serene, very calming. In this day and age where we live, in such a very, very fast-paced world, going in and relaxing in a shade garden is probably one of the best things you can do to relieve stress. Even working in a shade garden is very, very peaceful. So let's talk a little bit about the details of a shade garden. For one thing, they are a lot more muted than the typical sunny garden. And what I mean by that, they tend to be a lot more about leaves, a lot more about texture, a lot more about the actual green leaves, that sort of thing, more so than the pop of flowers. So if you look at a perennial border in full sun, it's always all about the flowers. In shade, don't get me wrong, you can get a lot of flowers. I mean, if you put some hydrangeas out there, if you put azaleas out there, you can get a ton of flowers. But the main purpose of the shade garden, it's more about the leaves. It's less about the flowers. It's more about, you get color and everything more so than if you're going to have a lot of flowers in it. There is some plants that actually, do flower pretty immensely in shade, but in most cases, the flowers are secondary compared to the other elements of the garden. Most of the flowers that you see in a shade garden usually happen in the springtime. The reason for that is, especially if you have shade produced by leaves, before the leaves come out of the trees, that energy from the sun hits the bottom of the ground. And a lot of plants take advantage of that, and that's when they bloom. Once we go into a deeper shade, then the flowers don't bloom. Some do, but not very many. I mean, the hydrangeas, they always bloom in the summertime. We do have the cardinal flowers. We have different types of stilbe. There are flowers that do happen during the summer, but most of them actually are produced in the springtime. Another thing is that you get a lot more of color in a shade garden by variegated leaves and more so than by the flowers themselves. That photograph that I have is a picture of a Goshiki osmanthus, and it's a variegated plant. The new growth on it is a really nice, brilliant red. And then as that leaf ages, it goes into that variegation. So you get a lot of color through leaves in a shade garden. The other thing, and I'm a big, big advocate of native plants. Think about it. When we're in Virginia, most of Virginia is or was a woods. It was a forest, and most of our native plants basically grow in shade. So if you're a big, shade or native fan, it's probably a shade garden is an awesome way that you can start, bringing natives into your garden. Because it doesn't get as much sun, naturally you are going to get a lot more leggy plants in a shade garden, which is okay because that actually adds a lot of personality to the garden. Another thing is that you'd be amazed on how many plants out there can actually do very well in shade or morning sun. Most of your native plants basically can take full shade to full sun. What happens in the woods in a native area, if a tree goes down, then a lot of the woody plants, meaning the shrubs and the trees, actually get a lot more sun, and they actually benefit from that by doing some sort of super bloom on it. But in most cases, a lot of those native plants and a lot of plants that we have out here at the nursery will tolerate a lot of shade. They're just not going to grow as fast. They're not going to be as dense, and they're not going to bloom as much, which gives you the idea of a lot more muted type garden. And another thing about them is there's a lot of plants out there that are advertised as a sunny plant. The best thing to do is to go out there and kind of look around and see what kind of plants that you can find out there in the landscape, when you're visiting a friend or even if you're driving your car, that actually do well in shade. I was really shocked the other day, it's like a month ago, I was down in our shady garden here at the nursery. Peggy actually put in a beautiful shade garden. And I was down there, and all of a sudden I look at the bridge where we have this really big redwood tree. I look over, and there's a Weigela just sitting there right next to the bridge, and real close to a sky pencil holly. And I'm looking at it and staring at it. It's in bloom. It's not a very dense bloom, but it is in bloom. It was a little on the leggy side, but this is a plant that actually I always thought that had to have sun or it just wouldn't produce any flowers. And I could be more, I was totally wrong. I've seen spirea, for instance, that actually does very well in shade. It's going to be a little bit more leggy. It does get some variegation on it. It does produce flowers. Another one is the deutzia. That's a wonderful plant to use in a morning sun type situation. Does flower very nicely. So I'm always surprised to find out what plants that I think actually do very well in sun only can actually do well in shade as well. And going back to the leggy plants again, I like woodland gardens. I do a big seminar on that. And when you have a leggy plant, it's always a really good opportunity to take some of your shady perennials and actually put underneath it to give the garden a little bit more interest. So let's talk about the basic designs of a shade garden. First of all, you need shade. And one of the best ways to get that is by putting in trees. You can do trees. Another option is getting an area in your yard that actually has that morning sun or that eastern sun. And the other option is to go to the north or eastern aspect of your house so that in the late afternoon, the house will block and you'll get shade that way. So that's probably some of the biggest ways to have to get your shade to start your shade garden. So after doing that, then you start to go into the elements of design. And one of those is going from the top and going down into the ground type of deal. You want to start with your overstory trees, which in most cases are already there. Understory trees are trees that actually grow beneath the overstory trees. We have a lot of different personalities, and a lot of the understory trees do extremely well in shade. They're not going to produce a lot of flowers, but they do very well in shade. After you decide on the understory trees, then we go into our shrubs. We go into our evergreen shrubs, and then we go into our deciduous shrubs. And after determining where they go, then you go into, you're getting your perennials. I always think of perennials as being the personality to a degree, more so than any other plants that you're going to put in. Perennials are ones that actually die to the ground in a year, and then they pop up in the springtime. And then during that time period, when they're up above the ground, is usually when you get into some of the personalities of either new growth, and again, you could go with flowers, that sort of scenario. And then after the perennials, then you go into doing your ground covers. These are like the carpet of the garden. These are the things that actually lay on the ground. A lot of people now call the ground cover more of living mulch, if you will. And then you always forget about vines. Vines do very well in shade. The main reason I say that is they actually grow up stuff and they search for the sun. But in the meantime, they literally are in shade as they search. And then once they get to a certain height and are exposed to the full sun, that's when they usually burst into color with their flowers. When you're deciding on your plants, think about your plants through all 4 seasons and what they have to offer during that time period. During the seasons, are they going to be an evergreen or deciduous? Are they going to look different in the spring as they would the summer, the fall, the winter? What are their highlights? Do they produce berries? What does their fall color look like? I actually put in this this garden photograph here because I wanted to show you that this is a fall garden. Take into consideration when you're looking at your shade-loving plants, you know, what they're going to look like through all 4 seasons and how they're going to grow. It's you know, when you're planting something in a garden, you're planting not just a garden, you're actually planting 4 gardens. You're actually planting a spring garden, a summer garden, a fall garden, and a winter garden. And I must say that a lot of people kind of downplay the winter garden, but winter gardens can be just as beautiful as any of the other ones. One thing about, you know, doing your design is think about what kind of conditions you have when it comes to moisture and when it comes to dry. A lot of shade gardens that are in the woods, keep in mind that those trees actually drink a ton of water. Once plants get established in the you know, in the woods, they would probably be fine. But getting there can be a little challenging because those trees drink up so much water. And while we're on the subject of trees and planting, when you plant really close to a tree, especially an established tree, make sure you go out about 4 feet from that tree. Because what happens is if you plant too close, you're destroying that root system of the tree. And what you do today probably won't have any hazardous or problems or anything until years down the road where the tree will die. So I always say that there's sacred ground around a tree, and always try to grow outside of that circle. If you do have to plant close to a tree, I always consider planting stuff that is very small and actually have those plants run through the garden instead of having them clumping through the garden. So another thing to think about when you're designing this garden is if you want to have a formal garden or a natural garden. Shade gardens in general, they do tend to have a more natural type of mood to them, more so than a formal garden. Even though a formal garden in general actually can be just as beautiful, you know, in shade. One of the basic things about a formal garden is having definite shapes and then also having straight lines and also being very symmetrical to a certain degree. Natural gardens tend to be a little bit more natural looking, a little bit more curvy, a little bit more, you know, the form of the plants tend to be a more natural form instead of a trimmed in type of form. And they tend to be more asymmetrical. But either one actually works very well in shade. I always like the idea of when I do a design, is there's a certain type of theme to that design. We are going to be looking at a white garden. You can do a garden that's made for, native plants. We could do a garden that's made for, an Asian influence. We could do an old English type garden, a forest garden. There's tons and tons of different themes of different types of gardens that you can have. My personal favorite is your own garden. I mean, making up a type of garden that suits yourself and kind of go away with not as many rules in there and not trying to duplicate something else, but make it your own personality. One thing about shade gardens is, and I do a total seminar on this kind of thing, is putting pathways through the garden. I love going out hiking, as I mentioned before, but the nice thing about a shade garden is you can hike through your garden and you're not literally looking into the garden, but you're actually a part of the garden. Putting in benches to be able to sit down, putting in all sorts of different types of, hardscape in there, like little patios, little walkways, even like a little fire pit in there. But it gives you a sense of being in the garden. And as I said, I really love the idea of having a very natural type look in your garden. I mean, that's my style, and using that as a theme for your garden. But the other thing about, with any garden that you do, there are other concepts of design. There's patterns, there's depth, there's cool color versus hot colors. There's all sorts of different elements to design. I've done classes on just design work itself. You can use that in any aspect as much as you want, or as little as you want. I mean, if you do like very, very natural gardens, you can go out there and actually pretend like, birds planted and seeded up the garden and make it look extremely natural. Or, emphasize one aspect of garden design. Look at form, look at, taking away one of the different levels of the garden. I've seen some beautiful shade gardens where they eliminate all the shrubs. So all you have are the high trees, the understory trees, and the perennials. It's almost like having a meadow in your garden, which can be very, very pretty. There's a gamut of different types of design concepts and everything that you can use when you're starting to design something like this. So I could do a whole seminar. I mean, I think I have done a whole seminar on native gardens. Native shade gardens are probably, in my opinion, probably some of the most beautiful gardens that you can have. You have to consider that, before the Europeans came here, Virginia was basically one big forest. And within that forest, there were all native plants. So the native plants that, do well in shade. And as I mentioned to you before about, native plants, when they do get exposed to the sun, they do the super blooms. They are able to handle the hot sun, especially once they're established. I've seen mountain laurel that once they're established, if a tree falls down, their leaves probably will turn brown to a certain degree, but all of a sudden the new leaves can actually take the full sun and you get these super blooms on them. So shade native plants love the shade. That's what they do. Another thing about them is that because they've been, native plants for about 70 million years, they actually know the conditions of the area. And so they do very well in our area. They basically have existed for a very, very long period of time. So they're a little less maintenance than some of the other plants that you get from Europe or from, Japan or from China. Another thing I always find interesting about native plants is that it's more than just the flowers. When you have flowers, you basically, all the native bees are out there pollinating them. We have some clethra right now that's in full bloom, and I've seen more pollinators on that plant than I've seen in any plant I've ever seen in my life. There's a wonderful plant to use if you're using them for pollinators. But to take it to the second extent, a lot of the native plants do produce a lot of berries to feed nature as well. And those berries can be spectacular, such as the viburnums and also the blueberries, the red twig. They produce berries. So the buttonbush produces berries or cones. So you get a lot more interest with a lot of these native plants than you do with some of the other plants in there. But probably the main reason why I like native plants is the sense of harmony that it produces within a forest. Remember, in a forest, everything is connected, and native plants grew up with all the other native plants. They know their niche, they know what they're supposed to do, they know how to play off other native plants, they know how the insects, they know about the dirt. They actually fit in a nook within the forest. And bringing back that, I think, is a very, very important. You can actually, when you go into a native forest, you can actually feel the difference of it. So let's now talk about the shade-loving plants. And this is probably, I love plants, so we'll get started on this right away. One of them is the redbud. Redbuds are native. They are a deciduous tree. They are understory, meaning that they get to be about 15, 20, maybe even 25 feet high, and probably about 15 to 20 feet wide. They naturally grow underneath other trees. They can take full shade to full sun. They do prefer to be in a little bit of shade in the afternoon if you're going to use some of the different varieties of them. And we're going to go into some great detail about those. So after the plant comes out with their flowers on it, and the flowers are there without any leaves, once those flowers start to die away, then you have the leaves to emerge. And what they've done with the native redbuds is those leaves that emerge can be quite spectacular. One of them is what I call the flamethrower. This is an example of the flamethrower. The leaf comes out as a really, really dark red. And then as that leaf ages, it goes into an orange color, then it goes into yellow, then it goes into lime green, and then eventually it grows into green. By the end of the summer, we have a green plant. But in the process of this, you get an incredible amount of color during the spring and into the summertime. All red buds turn yellow in the fall before they lose their leaves. But this variety here is called a flamethrower redbud. This is actually one of my favorites. This redbud is called Carolina Sweetheart. And the neat thing about this one is I don't believe that any two leaves are ever the same. Some of them can be red, some of them can be pink, white, or green. And then you have all the different variations of that. And again, eventually all these will turn into green. But in the meantime, it's like having these pink clouds in a garden. They're really spectacular. These are the native ones, by the way. My most favorite one is called Rising Sun, and this is an example of Rising Sun. After they're done blooming, basically what happens is they come out with orange leaves on them. And then again, as that leaf ages, it goes into all the different colors until it eventually turns green. It's a beautiful plant to use in a shade garden. It's really spectacular. And then probably one of the most common is the forest pansy. The forest pansy color reminds me a lot of a Japanese maple in the sense that it turns from that really, really purplish type of red on it, which you see a lot of Japanese maples do the same. And this one is one of those that does very well in our shade garden. Another plant, which this year I noticed, it's another native. It's called the bottle brush buckeye. They can get about maybe 12 to 15 feet high. They basically, when they start to flower, the bees and the butterflies flock to them. They do prefer to be in morning sun to give you the best amount of light. If you get too much light in the afternoon, they don't tend to like that very much. They do tend to like more of a moist shade, but it's a magnet for butterflies, and it's also a magnet for the honeybees. They do tend to sucker a bit, meaning that, you know, the main trunk, actually, you'll get suckers that come out and move, so you get a very nice grove of this plant. We have some beautiful ones out in our nursery this year with this plant. It's very, very underutilized. I always notice plants when I'm running around, and I live close to the Pan Am Shopping Center, and there's one over there that I've been keeping an eye on for the last couple of years, and it is unbelievable. And that one is in part shade, and it's spectacular when it's in bloom. Some of the other understory trees that you can put into your shade garden, one of them is the native dogwood. This is the dogwood that flowers without leaves, and then the leaves occur. They do get the berries to feed nature. They get about 20, 25 feet high. This is one of those plants where I see in the woods, and it does not get very many flowers on it in the shade, but it's muted. It's wonderful looking. You know, it's one of those plants that, you know, it's actually the Virginia state flower. And it feeds nature like you wouldn't believe. Another one is witch hazel. Witch hazel is very, very important. The reason why is the native witch hazel blooms in the fall, where bees really need to, you know, get their nectar for the wintertime. But we also have the non-native ones that actually bloom in wintertime. They're very highly fragrant. They bloom without leaves. The flowers on them look like spiders. They basically come in orange, yellow, and red. The neat thing about them is if you have a backdrop of sun that shines through them, it really makes them glow. And the other thing about the witch hazel is the fall color on it can be extremely bright red, and then around the edge can be yellow. They tend to be probably about 10 to 12 feet high, and they go out about 10 feet wide. They're a very wide type of plant. And then we have the sweet bay magnolia, which is a native. They can get 30, 40 feet high. I'm a huge fan of the magnolia. And the reason why is because of the scent. They smell really good. And the other neat thing about them is that they do reseed themselves pretty easily. They basically are a semi-evergreen, meaning they do lose some of their leaves during the wintertime. But they're a great plant to use if you want an upper story plant that adds a little bit of green during the wintertime. Japanese maples do extremely well. They are an understory tree. They tend to do extremely well in shade or part shade. Morning sun is probably more favorable on those. We have all sorts of different varieties of them. We have some of them can get about 3 feet high, and we have some that get about maybe 20 feet high. We have all the different varieties in between. A lot of people use Japanese maples as a specimen plant, you know, something to jazz up an area to make it into a focal point. I've seen gardens where they actually use them as a specimen garden, and they all get all sorts of different varieties of those in there. So there is a new type of evergreen tree that I found a couple of years ago at one of the trade shows that I went to. And it's actually a Japanese plum yew on a standard. These trees that grow very well in shade, they remind me of a Norfolk pine, a spectacular plant. I'm pretty sure that probably within the next 15 years, it's going to be a very common plant because it's an evergreen that does extremely well in shade. It's a needle, and the other thing is that it's extremely resistant to deer. We have a very bad deer problem, as everybody knows in our area. Finding a evergreen that takes shade is a really big find. So it's probably one of my favorite plants right now. The hemlock. Hemlocks are, I'm considering the understory, but they can get larger than that. Neat thing about living here is in Fairfax County, we have an old growth hemlock forest. It's the only old growth forest that we have in Fairfax. And it is a bunch of hemlocks, which I think is awesome. If you ever get a chance, you should, go out and look at them. They're not as old as you think they would be. They don't look that old, but they are an old growth forest, which is amazing. And the other one, it's one of, probably one of the more common ones, is the American hollies. American hollies do very, very well in our area. There's male and females. We usually carry the females because there's enough hollies to go ahead and make sure that those females produce the berries. And there's all those plants on there, all the native ones actually support a lot of nature. So one plant in particular that gives you a lot of personality in the understory is the dogwood. It's called wolf eye. This plant literally flowers and leaves out at the same time. The leaves on it are variegated. It is an understory. It gets about maybe 20 feet high. If you look at the bottom right-hand corner, those are flowers that they produce when they get the variegated leaves on them. And if you look at the top right, those flowers actually produce a big red berry. And the red berry is edible. It tastes a little bit like custard. You don't want to eat the shell of it, but the custardy stuff inside is really good. But probably one of the best things I like about this tree is that it gets some really beautiful variegated leaves that become pink during the wintertime. They have green and then they go into pink. That green there eventually is going to turn into red. So it's a really nice 3-season plant. So my all-time favorite plant is a big leaf magnolia. Big leaf magnolias are a native to our area. They look very, very tropical. I found one on one of my hikes one time and I couldn't believe it. It was during the wintertime and I'm seeing all these really big leaves on the ground and I couldn't imagine what it could possibly be. And then I had to wait for the spring and then I realized that it was a big leaf magnolia. They have the biggest leaves of any native plant in North America. We do carry them here. They are very, very hard to find. They do very well in our area. As I said, they're a native. One of the neat things about them is that their flowers produce male parts and female parts at different time when it's flowering so that it doesn't cross-pollinate itself, which I always find so interesting. They can get 30, 40 feet high. Just a spectacular plant to use, especially if you're a big native fan. Another one are the native viburnums. The arrowwood, we have the winter thir, the brandywine, the black haw, and the maple leaf. I find the arrowwood all over the woods when I go hiking. They do produce white flowers on them. They do produce a blue type of berry, which the birds just love and other animals love. They also turn into a really nice yellow. The winter thir / brandywine, they're not male or female, but they are plants that actually have the same genetic makeup. So winter thurs cannot actually pollinate other winter thurs. That's why you have to bring in a brandywine. You bring in a brandywine, the brandywines can actually pollinate the winter thurs, and the winter thurs can pollinate the brandywine. So that picture on the right is a winter fir. Their buds, their actual berries come out as a very, very light whitish pink color, and then as they age, they turn into a darker pink, and then eventually they go into this blue. And the leaf on that plant literally turns into a very, very nice red color. So some of the shrubs that do very well in shade is the mountain laurel, the aucuba, the alyssum, the mahonia, the Pieris japonica, the Japanese plum yew, the osmanthus, and azaleas. And we have a ton more of shade-loving shrubs out there. I mean, the palette is unbelievable of how many plants grow really, really well in the shade. One of my favorites is the mountain laurel. It is a native. The neat thing about it is if you look at the photograph of the flowers on there, it looks like these little white type of wires are coming out of the center of the flower, and they're embedded into the petal itself. They have tips of them that have pollen on them. And when a bee comes, they loosen up the actual tip of that, and it springs off of the petal and it hits the bee, which I always find fascinating. So the mountain laurels actually do very, very well to make sure that those bees get the get the pollen and go and pollinate another mountain laurel. So one of the bigger things, and I think Joe Cook is having a seminar just on hydrangeas. They are spectacular. They are probably, in my opinion, some of the best shade-loving plants out there. We do have the mycophilias, and these are the ones that basically are either pink or blue, depending on the pH of the soil. And you can get every single kind of colored flower in there if you get it down into a pH 7, which is neutral. These plants do very well in the shade. Another one is the smooth hydrangea or the Annabelles. There's all sorts of different varieties of those that are, being able to do extremely well in shade. But probably one of my all-time favorite is the oak leaf hydrangea. The smooth leaf and the oak leaf are native. The oak leaf I like because it has 4-season interest. It basically comes out with some beautiful flowers in the summertime, and then in the fall you get this brilliant red color on its leaves, and then also you get winter interest because the bark of that plant kind of peels back and can make it very interesting, while you have the brownness of the flowers that stay on the shrub all the way through the wintertime. This is a spectacular plant. And then we also have the hydrangea vines, which do very well. We have one here at the nursery in our garden out front with this north face, and basically it's been there for 25 years, and it's spectacular. It also has that peeling bark on it as well. So this is a sample of all the different colors you can get on a hydrangea by changing the pH of it. It's just spectacular. We have new varieties that literally grow up in new and old growth. So every year you consistently get a lot of flowers on it. And then this is a oak leaf in the fall. It's an incredible texture plant, but the color of the oak leaf, it just amazes me. So some of the deciduous type of shrubs that we have that can take a lot of shade. One of them is the native azaleas, the red twig dogwood, clethra, the winterberry, which is male and female, and then fothergilla, deutzia, and then also the forsythia. See, forsythia growing in shade is just beautiful. This is a picture of the clethra. I took a group of my colleagues out there yesterday in the heat, and we sat around and we watched bees for a little bit. The clethra, as I mentioned, is probably one of the best pollinator type flowers of any flower that I know of. And they're in full bloom right now. and you can get all sorts of different pollinators on them. The other neat thing about them is they're scented. They have an incredible smell to them. This is a picture of the native azalea. I'm fortunate to know where some of them are in the woods around here. And in the springtime, they can get 12 feet high, very, very leggy. But the neat thing about them is they get these puff balls of flowers on them, and they look like they're floating in the air. Wonderful plant to put into a shade garden. So let's talk a little bit more about the about perennials. The one that probably is best known for right now is the cardinal flower. The cardinal flower loves shade. It loves to be in a moist type area. It does reseed itself, but it is known for attracting a lot of the different hummingbirds. Hummingbirds just love that plant. Another one is the hellebores. Hellebores are not really a true perennial because they don't physically die to the ground. They are an evergreen. They come up with flowers and usually in the beginning of February and basically flower in March and February. A very, very important plant to use for pollinators. Those bees are hungry during that time of the year. And so having those flowers out there are very important. The thorn flower, there's native and non-native ones of those. And there's also ones that run, which means that the main plant will send out stems on the top and they will root themselves. And in doing so, you can have a colony of those. And then we also have the clumping type thorn flowers that basically make a bigger clump every year. The corabels, they're known for their colorful leaves. And then they're very whispery type of flowers that shoot out of the middle of them. They come in all sorts of different colors, anywhere from oranges to yellows to lime greens to dark burgundy colors. And basically, some of them actually are variegated and have more than one color on them. The woodland phlox is probably one of my favorites, and those are runners. It is a flock. It's not like the typical moss flock. This one gets a little bit bigger. It is an evergreen. It does send you a beautiful carpet of flowers in the early spring. If you have a type of dry type situation, epimedium is probably one of your better options for that. It can take it very, very dry. It's known for its spider-like looking type leaves. Like actually, this is it right here. The flowers on it look like this. They're amazing. The other thing about it is in the fall, they turn into this orange color. Whoever designed the garden out front has a Japanese maple, and underneath the Japanese maple, they put in the epimedium, and the epimedium actually mimics the same color as the Japanese maple above it. Whoever designed that was a genius, and basically looks like the epimedium is a reflection of the leaves up in the Japanese maple. Makes a beautiful, beautiful pairing. The Cresta iris, which is another type native plant. This one you can have blue flowers on it or white. It is a runner, meaning you will get a real nice grove of these. They flower in the early spring or medium spring. They are considered an evergreen as well. So that's a great plant to use in your shade garden. One of my newest interest, and I've known this plant for years, but for some reason it sparked interest this year, is the yellow waxbills. They can get about 2 feet high. They are now just about ready to bud out, and they give you some beautiful yellow flowers on them. The leaves are real nice and very, very lush. It would be a great plant to use in a garden. And I was looking out there the other day and came upon a mayapple. It's called Spotty Dotty. The variegation on that leaf is amazing. And we just have a few of those left, but they're unbelievable. And then underneath them, you get the flowers, which are pink. And then once they get pollinated, they actually do produce little tiny round apples on them. That's why they're called May apples. So there are grasses that actually grow very well in a shade garden. One of them is the Japanese forest grass. My colleague Michael Fay, that's like his favorite plant. Anytime he does any kind of shade garden, he always puts in the Japanese forest grass. Neat thing about it is it comes in a green, a variegated, and a lime green color. But it's great to use this plant because it gives you movement in a garden. It also gives you incredible texture. It's not an evergreen though, but the carex grass and the acorus grass are both evergreen, so that they will last through all 4 seasons. That would be a great plant to use for your fall and winter garden when you're trying to do the design. So let's talk briefly about ferns. I have ferns in my house. I'm a fern collector, but having them in the shade garden, they are running ferns, which means that they actually produce roots underneath the surface and they start to pop up everywhere. And then we have also the clumping ferns. And clumping ferns basically are ferns that actually produce a bigger mound of actual fronds on them. Some of their fronds can be very, very interesting. They actually, there's like the cinnamon fern. They actually send up the cinnamon stick in the middle of their clusters. And the ostrich fern basically sends up their woody type fronds during the fall and into the winter time to try to do their sexual thing. And we also have the variegated type of ferns. The Japanese painted ferns can be really pretty. We also have one that's called a autumn fern, which actually produces new red fronds on it. And then as that frond ages, it turns into green, which is an incredible plant. I think it's about 3 feet or 2 feet high. The ostrich fern can get 3 to 4 feet high. And then we have some very, very short ones as well. What's one of the best known fern is the Christmas fern, which is considered an evergreen. So ferns are always a good idea in a shade garden. One thing that's overlooked are foxgloves. Foxgloves, I went over to Peggy's house and she has a huge garden full of foxglove in shade. They do produce very well and they also reseed extremely easily. So that plant is a really good plant to use, especially if you want some of that, that perennial bold flowers on it. And then we also have, the hostas, which are basically deer salad. If you don't have deer, they're a great plant to use. The Empress Wu can get about maybe 4 feet high. It's probably one of the biggest ones I've ever seen. And then we also have the other extreme, which is mouse ears, which only get a few inches high. They are known for their variegation, and then their flowers on a lot of them can be scented. This is the Empress Wu here, which is amazing to me. It's a huge hosta. Some of the ground covers here that you can use. A lot of people can't grow grass in the shade, so they use a lot of these different types of ground covers. One of them is the mondo grass, which is really nice, but what I love is the moss. Moss does very, very well in the shade. Majuga, creeping jenny, mazes, just to add a few of those. There's a lot more of them. One thing that's overlooked with vines is the clematis. The clematis does tend to do very well when it comes to flowering in shade. I love having vines in a shade garden. You can actually use trees. You can use shrubs as a trellis, or there are what I call the teepees. They're cast iron ones that actually go up and you can grow stuff on them, especially for a more formal look when you use the cast iron. Some of the other ones just use the regular sticks, and the vines can grow on. They can make a really beautiful statement. one of the neat things about clematis is after they bloom, they have these funny looking balls that have all these legs and stuff on them. It's a really, really interesting plant. So I wanted to talk briefly about pairing plants together to make different looks. One of them is the Japanese forest grass with ferns, hosta, and corbel. If you look to the right, that is a nice pairing. So you get a lot of texture in there. You will get some flowers with the hosta and the corbel, but that variegated fern in there is just amazing. You have all sorts of different types of texture. It's a beautiful thing. Another one is the fern flower with the forest phlox. This is a great example of both of those plants that run and they will intermix with each other for about 2 or 3 weeks. You'll have a type of meadow like this that looks just spectacular. Another option is using the hydrangeas with azaleas. For shrubs, the azaleas actually produce a lot of beautiful flowers in the springtime, and they are an evergreen. The hydrangeas, on the other hand, are deciduous, but they actually bloom through the summertime. So that's a really nice pairing. We do have the Japanese clematis with the Goshiki osmanthus. There's a Japanese plum yew that's more of a ground cover type that actually does real nice with having the Goshiki, which is a taller plant, which has the variegation. So you get this green needle with this nice yellowish with new growth on red of the Goshiki osmanthus. And then my other one is the Maryland American holly, which is a dwarf variety. That one basically is an evergreen with the red twig. During the wintertime, there's red twigs coming out of that evergreen red or evergreen holly. Looks spectacular together. And then the other one, which is 2 of my favorite native plants, is the woodland poppy. I'm sorry, the woodland poppy and the Virginia bluebells. They look spectacular. They bloom exactly at the same time. The woodland poppies are considered to be endangered, so it's always good to put those in your garden. And then the other thing I want to mention is using some annuals and also some plants that are tropical. These plants actually, a lot of the plants from indoor, like the pothos, the prayer plant, and a lot of other ones, you can plant outside in the shade and they will go ballistic for you. The other one, which I really find, is the flowering consistently with some of the annuals, especially the impatiens and also the begonias. And the fuchsia does really well. And that will give you consistent color during the during the summer when it comes to flowers. And there's the impatiens. They were gone for a while, but now they're back. So I'm going to briefly go through some of these shade gardens. Here's some astilbe with some of your hosta. And then in there we have our Japanese orchids that are going to be blooming. A beautiful combination there. We do have some real pretty ferns with hosta. And then we have the primrose going through that. I'm not really sure. I think that might be the sweet woodruff with the small white flowers on it. And then we have our shade garden or our fall garden, which again, some of it just happens, but it's just so spectacular in the fall. Now that we're having so much, so much heat, I just can't wait for the fall to cool down a bit. But this is what it's going to look like. And then one of the ones that I really love is the shade white garden. And what I mean by that is it's a type of garden where you have leaves and you have white flowers. The astilbe, the clethra, the hydrangea, the foxglove. Another one is the white azaleas. but there's so many different types of white flowers that really do well in the shade. And just having a white garden is very, very spectacular. And then the last one is always putting a bench. I always like to go out and be in the garden. And, in the shade during the summertime is not as bad as being in the sun. But, having a bench in your garden so that you can sit down, and I don't want to look at your garden and say that needs to be done and that needs to be done. Just go in there and just sit down and just enjoy the surroundings. So, but anyway, that's my shades garden seminar. I think we probably do have time for some questions.
Yeah, definitely. So for anybody who needs to leave, it is 1 o'clock now. Just know we are recording. So if you want to come check the questions later, we'll have them posted to our YouTube channel along with the full recording tomorrow afternoon or around tomorrow afternoon. It's usually lunchtime. Sometimes it's a little bit later. We'll also be sending out a link to everybody who attended this class with a link to the recording and our class coupon. So for anybody who needs to leave, you'll still get access to that. Louis, if you're good, we can go for 20 or 30 minutes up to just
Yeah,
see
I'm
how many
fine.
questions we get.
I'd
Okay.
rather be in here than outside. I can't believe that I actually
So
did that
hot.
down to the second. I
Yeah, you
could
get
have
a
kept
little bit of
going,
a
but I
break.
kind of sped up towards the end.
All right. Well, we've had a lot of questions come in already, so I am just going to address a couple of things before we start. If you are having issues with the health of your plants at your house, I'm trying to get some notes out to people, but we're probably going to direct you to the plant clinic straight away. So you can call your preferred shopping location, so whichever store you usually shop at. You can hit reply on any of your emails that have come through, and that will go to me. You can email me, I'll connect you to our plant clinic online, or you can email or visit the store. If you come into the store and you're having an issue with your plant, bring in a sample in a plastic bag or some pictures. It's always best for them to actually see it. But I know it's the summer and people are having trouble with their plants from the heat and whatever other issues. So I've seen a few of those, just wanted to go ahead and put that out there.
Okay.
All right. So first question for you. I have a garden that is sunny in the morning, shade during noon, and then at the end of the day, it gets sun again. So we've got a part shade, part sun situation here. It's also very dry. Do you have suggestions for blooming perennials? Okay, so looking for blooms that can handle dry, part shade.
Okay. So dry, part shade.
Maybe suggest if you can do dry and then part shade separately, and then if there's
Okay. Yeah, for shady perennials, some of the best ones that I know of, one of them would be the epimedium. I mentioned the epimedium on there. Another option would be the bleeding hearts. Another option would be the sweet woodruff. Another option would be the Caresta iris. Another would be the coral bells. Another one would be the this the spiderwort. Another one would be, oh, something, the clover actually does very well. So
Okay.
so what happens when so you plant this stuff, right? And you get it in the ground and you water it and you get it established. In most cases, once that plant is established, most of those perennials actually would probably do fine. If it's under a shelter, that is a different scenario. But in most cases, most of those perennials out there, once they get established, will actually do fine in our area. To keep in the moisture and make sure that you water it, mulch it very well. And the other thing to do with a real dry area like that, about every 3 weeks, just give it a good hour type of watering. It will catch the water in the mulch, but it will be a nice deep watering, and that will get a lot of those plants to any kind of drought that you could go. And then that would open up your gamut to all sorts of different types of plants to use.
Okay, excellent. Alrighty, next questions. Just letting everybody know I'm going through chat, but I have a lot. Sometimes I miss questions in chat, so you might want to send them to the Q&A box, but I'm trying to check both here. Do you know if fir trees are one of the trees that it's difficult for perennials to grow underneath?
A fir tree?
Yeah, is that one where
Okay,
it's hard?
so a fir tree, I know we don't have any fir trees, and we do have the Chinese fir,
Oh, okay.
but other than the Chinese fir or the Japanese fir, all the other firs I know of, it gets too hot here.
Gotcha.
You know, a lot of our Christmas tree type firs actually don't grow in our area.
Okay.
A lot of our trees in general, as I mentioned to you, they do drink up a lot of water. I mean, our blue Atlas cedars, our deodora cedars, you know, a lot of our pines, all those type of plants, when they get big, they do drink water. But again, if you plant them, get them established over the, you know, it takes 2 years for a plant to get established. After that, just do a few supplementary type watering and you'll be able to get through. The only one I know about that actually plants have struggles with is the what is that plant called? It's the black walnut, I believe.
Yes. Okay. I knew there was one that's like,
Yeah, other than that, all the other, you know, conifers and stuff like that, actually, if you do supplementary water every couple of weeks, if it's real dry, we'll get most of the plants through.
okay, gotcha. Is it bad for the tree so is it bad for the trees if you have like climbing plants growing up those trees?
Okay, so there's two type of climbers. One climber actually will find nooks and crannies to be able to stabilize itself going up. A perfect example of that would be the Virginia. Another one would be the trumpet vine, and another one would be the native honeysuckle. They don't actually go into the tree. When you have ivy and you have the climbing hydrangea, those actually will send roots and they'll cling on and they'll go into it. And the trees don't like that. So you try to get the ones that actually find the nooks and crannies that can go up that way, more so than the ones that cling on to it with the root system.
What was the first one that you mentioned? That's a good one.
The crossvine.
Crossvine. Okay.
Yeah, that's another native.
So the crossvine, the trumpet vine, the native honeysuckle.
Yeah, the clematis.
Okay. And the clematis.
And I mean, what's so interesting to me is you can help it along until it gets onto a branch, and then it swings back and forth, and it'll hit something else, and we'll just twirl around, and it will just keep going.
Yeah, they find their way up. It's interesting to watch. Okay, we've got a couple questions about how tall the viburnum that you were discussing. About how tall are those viburnums that you mentioned?
Say that again.
The viburnums.
Uh-huh.
That you mentioned, about how tall or what is the height range?
Okay, so I've seen the arrowwood viburnum get to be at least 10.
Okay.
The black hall I saw at least 12 and with my hikes. The maple leaf, that one does not get as high. Probably about maybe 6 to 5 feet. But keep in mind, in shade, these plants are not going to grow fast. They're not going to flower as much. And if they ever do get too big for you, you can always trim them back.
Gotcha.
That's a neat thing about plants in general, is you can always, I mean, I've seen clethra in shade, really old shade, like over in Reston, over at their community center, their nature center. I saw a clethra over there that was at least 12 to 15 feet high. It's right off of the parking lot, so it gets fed with water a lot. Things spectacular. So, but yeah, the viburnums, they're almost like an understory tree, but not quite. They're still a shrub.
Okay. Okay. And can you discuss, do any of those viburnums, do they produce berries if you only plant one plant?
Okay, so when you have varieties such as the winter fir with the brandywine, so just think about nature in general. When before Christopher Columbus discovered America, there was no two viburnums that were the same genetic makeup. They were all different. That's why they survived for 70 million years. Now we have varieties, which means that each variety has the same genetic makeup. And so they cannot literally pollinate themselves. They need something from another one. So basically, when it comes to the arrowwood, if you have a plant that's called arrowwood actually is a true species, so that its genetic makeup is different. So they will cross-pollinate each other pretty simply.
Okay.
And then there is the blue muffin, and I think one is called Chicago luster. Those are varieties of the arrowwood, and they basically will pollinate other arrowwoods, but a blue muffin cannot pollinate a blue muffin.
Gotcha. Okay, so it sounds like maybe if you are thinking about cross-pollination for viburnums, it might be something you want to talk to a plant specialist about.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty. If you have just a general plant that has a general name on it, then it's probably fine that it will pollinate. But let's say you have one that's a variety, but they probably will not.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, this is I'm gonna add a little commentary here, and then you might have something to add. So we got a comment in about how insects can't see like certain colors, so they're less attracted like to the nine barks. Some of the darker colored nine barks they might be less attracted to. So you may have some comments on that, but I wanted to tell people really quickly. Our colleague Caitlin Ackerhouse has compiled massive amounts of research on this topic. This is her passion. And we actually did a Q&A class with her last week, and it ended up covering a variety of plants people on that webinar were interested in. But she did share a ton of resources. You can always contact her at the store if that's something you want to do a deep dive on. It's fascinating. I'm personally not an expert on that, but she really knows a lot about it. So I would recommend anybody who wants to do a deep dive on like which color plant to purchase or which specific cultivar for pollinators, contact her. Or look at that class. 2 places to go. Just email me and I'll send you the link. So Louis, do you have anything you want to add on that?
So I when it comes to like plants in general and pollinators, what I would suggest is basically going with the pure natives, because those are the ones that literally will get the most pollinators in general. I mean, as I said, with the cluster out there. Another thing I found interesting is with variegated plants. I mean, if you're a total purist when it comes to, native plants, when it comes to variegation, when insects and stuff land on that leaf, they'll bullseyes towards birds to eat them and other things because they show up. Their camouflage doesn't work anymore. So keep that in mind as well.
Okay. Yeah, it's such a fascinating topic, and I wish we could do a Q&A with her every week, because we ended up covering like 4 types of plants, like really in depth. But it's just, anyways, I'm fascinated by that. It's just, I don't have time to do all.
Well, you mentioned the nine bark. I was up in Pennsylvania visiting my cousin, and she had a wild nine bark.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It was wild. I mean, and it had flowers on it that were huge, and they were anywhere from pure white into pink. I didn't know what it was, and I was shocked. So, and I told Joel, I was like, we got to get in some of this nine barks.
Yeah.
And when there was bees all over it.
Yeah. Oh, neat. I just love it. All right. Which of the shade? Oh, this is a good question. Which of the shade perennials bloom during summer rather than spring? So if someone wants flowers now, what native perennials should they be looking at?
Okay, so right now.
Sorry, shade perennials. I'm still thinking natives.
We're getting into the anemones are starting to bloom now. There were some down there that were in bloom. Another one would be your wild or your native, your perennial begonias. They're blooming now. Another one is going to be your yellow waxbill. They're getting ready to bloom. But the one that's really comes out in my mind is the cardinal flower, the lobelia. That one is in full bloom right now.
I love that one. Okay, I'm typing that out for spelling for people. All right, next question. We're doing pretty good on time. We may actually get to all of these. I have lilies of the valley that have taken over the front bed. Is it possible for me to thin them out and add in some natives? So I suppose this would be, are there any shade natives that you know of that won't be choked out by Lily of the Valley, or should we send Michael? Sorry, this is I actually know a woman named Michael. This might be woman or man. Michael wants to know if there's any shade natives he can plant.
Yeah, I got it.
Okay.
So when I think about that, I think about the battle that would occur and how beautiful that battle would be. And the reason why I say that, you got this conflict. One of them would be the sweet woodruff. Sweet woodruff is a clumping plant, and it's pretty substantial. So put a few of those in there. If you want to go with some runners, I would suggest the running tapestry tiarella, which is a fern flower.
Okay.
Another one that really would take off in there would be the woodland phlox.
Okay.
Another one would be the I'm looking around down there. I mean, creeping Jenny is hard to hold back. Some people regret that, but that would definitely be an option.
Okay.
Another one would be clover. Clover is really well, especially the native clover, be very well in a garden in shade.
Okay.
Another one would be a juga. Another option would be the the vinca would actually do very well. Scattered through there with that broadleaf.
Okay. Those are some good options. Alrighty. Next question. The old growth hemlock forest that you mentioned people should visit. Where is that? Is that in Fairfax?
So it's over in the Clifton area.
Okay.
And it's on Bull Run.
Okay.
So it's between 28 and the area where Clifton is. It's in that area.
Gotcha.
So
all right, question
it
about
is
that.
unbelievable. But don't tell anyone else about it, because people, I mean, when you go hiking, you don't want a lot of people around.
That's good. It's a good spot then. Yeah.
I should never have said that.
You're reminding me of a friend who told me about a sushi restaurant she loved that had about 6 tables, and she said, "I'm telling you about this, but you can't tell anyone else." Alrighty, let's see here. Next question. Should clematis be cut back, and if so, when?
Okay, so there's 2 different types of clematis.
Okay.
One grows off of new growth and coming out of the ground, and the other one is ones that bloom off of grow off of old growth. So it's hard to say. It really depends on the clematis that you have. If you go outside and look at your clematis and you see the real old type of woody stems and you see the new growth coming off of it, then you can trim that, but don't trim it all the way to the ground. If you look at your clematis and all the growth is coming out of the ground and moving up, then that's the one that blooms, that grows off of new growth. So it really depends on the clematis. Most of them are old growth, meaning you can trim them during the wintertime, but keep in mind when you trim them that you're trimming off flowers. So a lot of people, what they do is they take a lot of the old stuff off. Right in the beginning of the spring, when you look at the plant and you have the new growth, there's probably going to be some stems in there that are not, producing, which means that it's dead. And it's kind of nice to get all the dead stuff out.
Okay. All right. Next question. Louis, this might be one, this might be a little bit more involved. Let me start with, I'm going to do these in reverse order. We have time for both. Do you recommend any evergreen trees, like an understory tree that's an evergreen that you would use for screening?
For screening?
Do most of them need, yeah.
Okay, so
shade, I guess.
So the hollies would be perfect for screening.
Okay.
Another one, if you're patient, so green giants, I have seen grow in shade. They grow slow, but they will grow. Another one would be privets, ligustrum.
Yes.
I've seen ligustrum grow in shade. Another option would be your skip laurels. They're an evergreen. I mean, it really depends. Skip laurels get about, 10 feet high, 12 feet high. The ligustrums get to be about maybe 12 to 15 feet high. Another option would be your hemlocks. Hemlocks will lose their bottom. They will, become a little on the leggier side. It really depends on the height that you want, but green giants actually do well in shade. They do stay dense, but they grow very slowly. But
Okay.
they will do that. Keep in mind too, with those hollies, that they will literally not be as dense in shade, but they will give you coverage because your eye focuses on what's close to you. So even if you can see through it, all that stuff that you see on the other side of that holly is going to be blurred.
Okay. Okay. Alrighty, this is our last question, and it's a bit of a design question. That's why I went ahead and shuffled that one to the last one.
Okay.
Yeah, because I knew you'd want to spend a little more time on this. So this person has a small eastern facing garden. So small is like 12 feet by 20 feet, they said. She's pulling out 6 nandinas. She has a white oak and a cedar and a couple of beauty berries. So what do you recommend for I know there's a lot of recommendations here, so I'm hoping if you're still doing some work at the store where people can come in with stuff, that you might be able to tell everybody about that. And then what do you recommend if someone's pulling out 6 nandinas? Do you have any favorite plants you'd recommend?
Okay, so I mean, first of all, I would like to say take photographs, take measurements, and come in. We will find a nice AC area, and we will go over and look at everything. It's kind of hard to do this, but if I had to, I mean, if there's no deer, hydrangeas are always a good idea. Azaleas are always a good idea. Pieris japonica is always a good idea. I mean, and the list just goes on and on. The Akuba, they want a more tropical look would be a good idea. If they want a more formal look, putting in some boxwoods with the hydrangeas. I mean, there's whole gamut of different types of plant to use. The Japanese plum yews, the Goshiki osmanthuses. I mean, and the list just goes on and on and on. Some of the native plants that would be good in there would be some of the viburnums. Another option for those would be, the clethra, which is very good in shade. What I would recommend though is, they can contact me by phone here at the nursery. I can literally give you my texting number. I have no problem with that. So that the person can send me some photographs of it. And we can, if she lives really far away and she can't come in, I would be more than happy to help her move along with, just sending the photographs. I'll look at the photograph. Oh, you need a blah, 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 and a blah, 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 and a blah, blah, blah. But it visually is the key to that.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah, I wanted you, I know. So Louis, you're fabulous at designing woodland gardens and you love doing it. So I was like, oh, he's got to tell everybody about how he can, help people in person. All right. Well, that's actually the last of our questions. So we wrapped up before 1:30, which is great. So a couple of quick notes for everybody before I let Louis get the last word. Joel Cook next week is doing a full class on hydrangea. So we've offered this for the first time last year because people come to us and they are worried that their hydrangeas aren't blooming. And most of the time it is apparently a pruning issue because different hydrangeas require different pruning. So he covers how to tell which type of hydrangea you have, how to prune it, all of that stuff. So we'll be doing that next Tuesday. It should be a great class and very helpful for anybody with hydrangea. So we're doing that next Tuesday. Our fall class schedule is coming together, so we will be beginning to post those classes on the website over the next couple of weeks. And anybody who needs to follow up on this class, please feel free to send me an email, call your plant clinic, as I mentioned, if you need to discuss any issues you're having with your plants, if you have questions for Louis or want to talk about a woodland garden design with him, shade garden design. Feel free to call the Fair Oak store to get in touch with Louis. I will also put you in touch with him. You can email me. I'm happy to do that as well. So those are, I think that's everything on my end. We will be sending out the recording and the coupon tomorrow. Louis, what do you want to close with?
Oh, I just want to say that, first of all, I love shade gardens. And it was kind of ironic because, I was outside yesterday watering in the sun, and I got into the shade and I did some of the hydrangeas. It did feel so much better. So I'm a big promoter of shade gardens, so I love them.
All right.
That's,
Well,
that's
thank
what I
you.
want to close with.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much, Louis. Always
Thank
fun to
you.
do classes with you. And hopefully we'll see some of you all next week at our hydrangeas class. So talk to you
Okay.
later. Bye.
Yeah, see you all. See you, Sally.